was a big weekend of prospect promotions. Let's discuss on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5 on Monday, June 10th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White. And first up, the Rockies promoted 21-year-old second base prospect Adael Amador, with Brendan Rodgers going on the IL. This season in the minors, Amador was batting .194 with a .337 on base percentage, 7 homers, 22 steals. He was heating up recently. Last 15 games was batting .295 down in the minors, 16% rostered. Scott, what size leagues were you looking to add Amador, and will he stick around even when Rodgers returns?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. He could. It could be a Wally Pipp situation. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a long-term absence for Brendan Rodgers, but the Rockies have been waiting a long time for him to come through on his potential, and it doesn't seem like it's happening. So if Adael Amador lights it up, then I imagine he could stick around long-term. But I think that's a pretty big if. It's a very good prospect, don't get me wrong. Great hit tool, near 1-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio each of the last 2 years. Some speed, has hit for power, not with premium exit velocities, but the hit tool is so good that he doesn't necessarily need premium exit velocities, does Amador. But yeah, he hadn't mastered AA yet. Ridiculous 9-game stretch leading up to the promotion that, I don't know, maybe the Rockies' internal evaluation tells them that he has actually mastered AA, but it's hard to look past that 194 batting average for the season. And it just strikes me as a desperation move and a rush job at a time when hitting prospects are having a hard time breaking into the majors. I mean, Wyatt Langford hasn't been able to do it. Jackson Chorio, Jackson Holiday. So I'd bet against Adael Amador with his 194 batting average at AA doing it, but the upside's there. I threw a chunk of cash at him in a 15-team roto league just because there's so little worth spending on the waiver wire, and just kind of crossing my fingers and hoping that this lottery ticket pans out. But I wouldn't say I'm optimistic.
Let's talk about 2 big pitching prospects who got promoted over the weekend. Hurston Waldrep with the Atlanta Braves. He actually made his debut on Sunday against the Nationals. He was cruising until he wasn't, because
bruising.
The final line, 3 2/3 innings, 7 runs allowed, 4 hits, 4 walks, only 1 strikeout for Hurston Waldrep. 22 years old, first-round pick in last year's draft, and he's 34% rostered. The other name here is Drew Thorpe, who is being promoted on Tuesday to join the White Sox. He'll make his debut against the Mariners. He came over in that big Dylan Cease trade right before the season. He's 23 years old and has looked awesome in 11 starts at AA. 1.35 ERA, .87 whip. Scott, who do you prefer? Are you looking to add either one, Drew Thorpe and Hurston Waldrep?
I mean, I wouldn't call them high priority ads either. So in that 15-team league where anybody of any amount of interest is worth picking up, I actually had Amador the highest of the 3, in part because my hitting needs are so much greater than my pitching needs. And I think that's true for most of the people listening out there, just given the context of this season. Hurston Waldrep would have been number 1 on the priority list by a lot, but the wind is kind of out of the sails after the way that debut went. The 1 strikeout, the 4 walks, it wasn't encouraging. And, major league debut, nerves were at play. It sounds like he's going to get another turn, will Hurston Waldrep, and maybe that'll go much better. I think the upside is high, very impressive splitter. The fastball peaked at 98. I think he's the second most talented pitcher from last year's draft class behind Paul Skeens, but it didn't go well in this debut. And there's a low margin for error for any pitcher in fantasy right now, just given how saturated the pitching market is. So, if Waldrep doesn't turn things around at his next start, he might get sent down because they still have Spencer Schwellenbach, who they've kept around. But I do prefer Waldrep to Drew Thorpe. For one thing, Thorpe's debuting for the White Sox, And he's not Garrett Crochet, I don't think. So how much value can he provide with that bad of a supporting cast? He'd have to be really, really, really good. And he's been really, really good in the minors the last 2 years, has Thorpe, but he hasn't progressed past Double-A. And it's mostly just a wipeout changeup that he has. I don't even know that wipeout is the word. How do you describe a changeup that's really good? It's a really good changeup. Minor leaguers aren't used to seeing a lot of really good changeups. Major leaguers are, and I'm not sure Drew Thorpe has enough of a weapon otherwise to be an impactful pitcher. Maybe he'll surprise me in that way. I did have him as a top 100 prospect coming into the year. He's efficient, throws a lot of strikes. He does some things well, but you got to be lights out again to really make an impact as a starting pitcher in fantasy right now. And I'm not confident Thorpe has quite that kind of upside.
There were two other prospect promotions. The Mariners promoted first baseman Tyler Locklear, and the Brewers promoted pitching prospect Carlos Rodriguez. And you can hear about those on our full-length podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Odyssey app, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.